"Excuse me," he said sharply, not even looking her in the eye. "Could you get the food for table 6? We've been waiting too long." She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just looked at him, long enough to let the weight of the moment settle, then answered quietly, "Of course, I'll take care of it." 8 minutes later, his entire funding pipeline would collapse, and he'd never know what hit him. "Tell us where you're watching from, and whether you've ever been mistaken for someone you're not." The Fairmont Grand Ballroom sparkled in a way that only expensive silence could. Everything shimmered, from the crystal centerpieces to the cufflinks worn by men who hadn't touched a subway in decades. Violinists played in the corner, pouring out a forgettable Bach concerto, while wealthy voices murmured about carbon credits, diversity optics, and quarterly returns. This was the ESG Vanguard Gala, where billions in ethical investment funds were quietly allocated by a few very unethical egos. It was also where Dr. Celeste Monroe, a 45-year-old black woman in a charcoal gray blazer, was just told to serve food. She had been standing beside a table of white linen name cards, scanning the seating chart when it happened. Liam Foster, CEO of Foster Tech Ventures, mid-40s, slick hair, tailored suit, and just enough charm to hide his contempt, had barely glanced up from his phone. "You're catering, right? We're starving over here," he added, gesturing to a circle of executives seated nearby, all of them stifling chuckles. One leaned over, stage whispering, "She's not even in uniform." Another, "Probably crashed the gala. You know how they slip through sometimes." Celeste offered a brief smile, not warm, not sarcastic, just neutral, then turned away without another word. Down a corridor marked staff only, she walked calmly into a silent break room. Inside, a small table, a lamp, a security terminal. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, matte black USB key. Unmarked, untitled, deadly. She inserted it into a secure laptop, then typed in a code, slowly, like someone who had waited years for this exact moment. Federal clearance verified. "Welcome, Dr. C. Monroe, EthosIndex dashboard. Active, coverage, 83. Investment firms, 147 ESG programs, 1.2 authorized capital or a hand hovered over one option. Activate red flag protocol." She clicked. Target company, Foster Tech Ventures. Grounds, public ethics violation, code 4.6. Auto downgrade, yes. Impact radius, Emina. Impact partners, Bryston Capital, Green Ethic Alliance. She hit confirm. The dashboard pulsed once, then again. 1.2B in ESG-linked funding entered automatic hold. 19 major partners would receive alerts within the hour. 2 CEOs, including Liam Foster, would lose federal eligibility for 12 months, all because he mistook a black woman in pearls for a caterer. Back in the ballroom, the music never paused. Liam was now leaning in, whispering loudly to a group of investors, laughing at his own story about entitled consultants who think they know ESG better than founders. Celeste re-entered the room like nothing had happened. Her steps were measured, her face unreadable. She walked past Liam's table without a glance. He didn't recognize her, not even now. He would, soon. Celeste returned to her seat. Table 19, last row, no spotlight, and crossed one leg over the other. Her phone buzzed once in her lap. Incoming alert. EthosIndex. Status change propagation in progress. A simple message, but it meant chaos was already moving. Foster Tech's compliance score had just dropped to non-compliant. That meant Bryston Capital's co-investment clause was invalid, which triggered Green Ethic's insurance review clause, which locked 1.2B across the ESG chain in under 8 minutes. She watched them, the men laughing, toasting, ordering another round. They had no idea. They always thought the woman at the back of the room didn't matter, didn't belong, didn't own the very system they depended on. Celeste smoothed the front of her blazer and took a sip of water. Her silence didn't mean surrender. It meant precision. The applause hadn't started yet. Not in the ballroom. Not in her life. Celeste Monroe leaned back slightly in her chair at table 19, letting the gentle hum of the Gala swirl around her. The orchestra had moved on to Cole Porter. Men laughed from their throats. Women sipped wine behind polished smiles. Forks danced across porcelain. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the scent of citrus cleaner hit her memory before anything else. She was 9 years old, curled in the corner of a break room that smelled like bleach and floor wax. Her mother, Viola Monroe, was on her knees in a fast food bathroom, scrubbing under the sinks long after closing. She'd brought Celeste along because the babysitter quit again. Rent was due, groceries were light, and sometimes a little girl had to sit on a stack of napkins and finish her math homework beside a mop bucket. Celeste remembered watching her mother's small frame moving rhythmically, her shoulders never still, her silence never angry, just tired, deep tired, the kind of tired you never sleep off. "Mom, why do you have to work here so late?" she whispered once. Viola had paused only briefly. "Because people don't give you what you deserve, baby. You earn it, even when they're not watching." Celeste had nodded, but she hadn't understood. Not yet. They lived in Cleveland's East 105th, in a crumbling brick building where heat came from the stove, and neighbors left their doors open to borrow sugar or watch each other's kids. Her mother worked 3 jobs: morning shift at a school cafeteria, evening janitor, nighttime office cleaner. She never complained. But at midnight, when she thought Celeste was asleep, Celeste would hear her crying in the bathroom, soft, buried behind the sound of running water. It was in those moments that something sharp formed inside her. Not bitterness, not even resentment, determination. A need to protect that woman who had never once protected herself. At 13, Celeste borrowed a dusty ThinkPad from the community library and started reading investment articles she barely understood. She printed old Forbes interviews. She kept a notebook of CEOs who used to be poor. She never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to never again be asked, "Can your mom afford this field trip?" In high school, she joined every academic team, debate, business club, math league, because extracurriculars came with bus rides and food. But even there, the comments came. "You speak really well for where you're from. You're so smart. Are you sure you're not mixed?" They probably gave you that spot to meet their diversity quota. She smiled through all of it. She remembered her mother's words, even when they're not watching. Except, they were always watching. Just not in the way that saw her for who she was. Harvard accepted her at 17. Full ride. Viola cried so hard at the letter, she had to sit down on the porch step. That first day on campus, Celeste stood in Harvard Yard surrounded by students in designer shoes and Rolex watches, all pulling monogram suitcases. She arrived with one duffel bag and a stack of secondhand textbooks. The difference wasn't just money, it was the assumption of entitlement. The unshakable belief some people had that they belonged, simply because no one had ever told them otherwise. Celeste had never known that feeling. So she made a vow, right there, standing beneath the ivy-draped buildings. "I'll never ask for a seat at their table. I'll build the table. I'll own the table." But the insults followed her, even with the Ivy League name badge. When she entered the finance world, she realized that degrees didn't erase biases. They just made the prejudice sound more polite. One summer, at an elite consultancy, she presented a market trend report that was so precise, it saved the client millions. The managing partner nodded, then handed the summary to a white intern who had offered zero input and said, "Great work, Jason. We'll go with this." Celeste didn't flinch. She just wrote Jason's name down in a notebook she called the Quiet Book. It wasn't for revenge. It was for clarity. By 30, she had quietly become one of the most sought-after ESG strategy consultants in the country. By 35, she had been recruited by the U.S. Ethical Investment Board, and 3 years later, she architected the EthosIndex, a groundbreaking national framework for measuring ethical behavior in corporations seeking ESG funding. It was her masterpiece. Her fingerprints were in every algorithm, every compliance trigger, every single clause that could bring a billion-dollar firm to its knees. But no one ever quoted her in press releases. Her name never appeared on stage, because the men in suits liked the idea of ethics, as long as they could control the face of it. And Celeste? She was too quiet, too firm, too black. And yet, she never raised her voice. Because real power doesn't yell. It signs approvals. It denies access. It moves billions in silence. Back in the ballroom, Celeste opened her eyes. The sound of applause erupted at the far end of the room. Someone on stage was receiving an award for inclusive investing. She didn't clap. She just sipped her water, thinking about her mother, who had died 2 years ago in a hospital that charged her for every overnight stay because Medicaid took too long to process. She had died never owning a home, never flying first class, never resting. But Celeste had kept the promise she whispered into her hand at the funeral. I will take care of it now. Across the room, Liam Foster raised a toast with his circle of yes men. Still laughing, still clueless. Celeste's phone buzzed again. Status update. Bryston Capital. ESG Access suspended update. MENA Impact Partners. Under review. Action required. Foster Tech CEO violation. Public record. Pending. She exhaled slowly. It was starting. The woman they had asked to serve food was about to serve them a lesson they would never forget. And she wouldn't have to say a word. The first time Celeste Monroe was told she was too quiet to lead. She was 26 and had just finished presenting a flawless audit strategy to a room full of seasoned Wall Street consultants. One of them, a gray-haired man in a navy three-piece suit, leaned back, tapped his Mont Blanc pen on the table and said, "Impressive, but leadership requires more presence. You disappear when you're not speaking." Celeste had smiled, thanked him, and sat down. That evening, she redrafted his entire ESG risk model, in silence. 2 weeks later, his own firm adopted it as policy. He never gave her credit, and Celeste never asked for it. People like him didn't see her coming, because they never looked. Over the years, she learned to read the subtle signs. The long pause before someone realized she was the one leading the meeting. The way eyes shifted to the white man beside her, assuming he was in charge. The awkward, "Oh, you're Dr. Monroe," followed by a weak chuckle and a quick apology. Some of it was unintentional. Most of it wasn't. Celeste didn't waste energy trying to prove herself in the moment. She let results do the speaking later, in boardrooms, in balance sheets, and eventually, in federal policy. Still, the dismissals left marks. Not open wounds, but small, sharp cuts that hardened her skin over time. At 31, while consulting for a multinational banking group, she had drafted an ethics compliance framework that prevented $84 million in fraud. When the final report was published, her name appeared only once, buried in 9-point font at the back as supporting analyst. When she mentioned it to the senior partner, he laughed and said, "Titles are just politics, Celeste. You're smart. You know that." She did, which is why she started documenting everything, every version, every timestamp, every email thread. She didn't do it to sue. She did it so that when power finally circled back, she could drop receipts like thunder. That habit of watching, tracking, filing would later become the backbone of what made EthosIndex so dangerous to corrupt corporations. Because it didn't just track numbers, it tracked patterns, it learned, it remembered, just like she did. Back at the Gala, a well-known venture capitalist was now speaking on stage about inclusive innovation. Celeste didn't clap. She'd watched him, 3 years ago, push a brilliant Afro-Latina founder out of her own company during Series B funding, replacing her with a frat buddy turned CEO. The founder's idea went on to make $200 million. She never saw a dime. That man was now being honored for empowering underrepresented talent. Celeste's jaw tightened just slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice. But inside, she was already typing his name into a private file she kept within the EthosIndex system. It was called Performative Leaders, Under Observation. There was a reason they never saw her coming. She didn't play their game. She built her own system, one that didn't need their validation. When she launched EthosIndex, many in the investment world thought it was just another bureaucratic filter, another box to check for PR purposes. They were wrong. She had baked real teeth into the algorithm. If a company violated key ethics standards, like labor discrimination, biased hiring, or public misconduct, the system didn't just suggest action. It triggered it. Funding paused. Partners alerted. Federal flags raised. It only took one real incident for everyone to panic. A Fortune 500 firm lost its ESG access after an internal whistleblower reported racial harassment. The EthosIndex verified and dropped their score in under 72 hours. Celeste never spoke publicly about that case, but she saw the aftermath, and she knew. They still didn't know who pulled the string, which was perfect. Let them think she was just compliance. Let them think she was back office staff or IT or someone's assistant. The more invisible she stayed, the more exposed they became. At one point during the gala, a man in a gray tux, the CFO of a green energy fund, accidentally bumped into her near the dessert table. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said casually, then looked her up and down. "Are you one of the event servers? These little tarts are amazing." He smiled, handed her his empty plate, and walked off before she could respond. Celeste stood still for a moment. She looked at the plate in her hand, then calmly placed it on a tray near the exit, dusted off her fingers, and texted her compliance assistant. "Please check Greenrise Capital for hiring ethics violations. Look into diversity metrics by department." Some would say that was petty, but Celeste didn't believe in petty. She believed in documentation, data, and dignity. And in this industry, the only way to be seen was to make sure your silence echoed louder than their applause. She learned that from her mother, too. Viola Monroe never shouted when disrespected at work. She just came home, sat down, and started writing letters. Letters to unions, to school boards, to tenants' rights groups. She never sent them, but she kept them, neatly filed in a box labeled, "When they come asking." Celeste kept that box. And now she had one of her own, except hers was digital, real-time, and tied to $1.2 billion in federal funds. So when people asked her why she didn't speak up more, or why she stayed so low profile, she always had the same answer. "Because the moment I speak, it's over, and I like watching them dance for a while first." At 9:13 p.m., she received the notification she'd been waiting for. Foster Tech Ventures, ESG score, downgraded to critical. Auto notice sent to 19 investment partners. Briston Capital response, withdrew participation. Impact radius, 1.2 BI at risk. She stared at the screen for 2 seconds, then powered off her phone. Across the ballroom, Liam Foster was clinking glasses and laughing. His pitch deck was scheduled to go live on Monday. His next funding round, 140 million, was already in motion. He had no idea that in less than 12 hours, his name would be removed from every active ESG investment list in the country. No press release, no drama, just gone. Celeste finished her sparkling water, stood, smoothed her dress, and began walking slowly toward the exit. The clinking of forks, the hum of the orchestra, the warm buzz of ignorance trailing behind her like perfume. They didn't see her leave, just like they didn't see her coming. By the time Celeste Monroe stepped out of the gala, the downtown wind had picked up, brushing against her cheek like the whisper of a long-forgotten warning. "They'll never give it to you, so you build it yourself." That voice didn't come from the city. It came from Viola Monroe, her mother. And tonight, that voice echoed louder than any applause in the ballroom behind her. She didn't head home. Instead, she walked down 6th Avenue toward a tiny, dim-lit bistro tucked between two corporate towers. A place no one from the Gala would dare step foot into. No cameras, no industry smiles. Just people eating, talking, breathing. This was where real life happened. Celeste slid into the back booth. The waiter recognized her immediately. "Your usual, Dr. Monroe?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't ask for credentials, didn't confuse her with kitchen staff, didn't blink when she ordered straight. No menu, just respect, wrapped in silence. While she waited for her food, her phone buzzed softly. Not once, not twice, but 5 times in succession. She unlocked the screen. 5 new messages. Secured channel, Ethos Ops. Bristol Capital, immediate withdrawal from Foster Tech. Green Ethic, funding freeze confirmed, legal triggered. Mina Impact, all ESG compliance clauses paused. Fiducia Legal, requesting audit files on Foster Tech pre-clearance. Van Tech Group, recommending CEO disassociation memo. Celeste didn't even smile. She just typed 3 words in reply. Let it fall. 10 minutes later, while she was sipping lentil soup, Liam Foster was in a back room of the Fairmont losing his mind. "I don't understand. How the hell does this just happen?" he barked into his phone. "What do you mean Bristol pulled out? They gave me the term sheet this morning." His assistant stammered on the other end. "They said, apparently, there's been an ethics downgrade? Something flagged in their compliance system. They're calling it non-compliant behavior in a high-visibility setting." Liam blinked. High visibility what? He turned to his VP of operations, eyes wide. "Did someone leak something?" She shook her head. "There were no incidents, unless—" She stopped. He froze. There was one thing. That woman. The one by the table. The one he told to get food. But no, that couldn't be it. She was no one. A server, a +1. At most. Right? Wrong. Back in the bistro, Celeste's food arrived. Grilled salmon, jasmine rice, roasted carrots with harissa. A glass of Pinot Noir. She ate slowly, watching her fork slice cleanly through the fish, as if the universe were reminding her, cut precisely. Don't smash. As she chewed, she opened her private dashboard again, the one not even her EthosIndex team had access to. Live cascade monitoring, Foster Tech collapse, 4 partner funds, paused. 2 legal reviews initiated. Unsec watchlist tag added pending. She tapped a hidden menu and opened her observation grid, a spiderweb-like chart connecting executives, funds, behaviors, past incidents, and risk scores. Liam Foster's name lit red. 3 other names pulsed yellow, early warnings. Celeste drew a connection between one of them, Van Tech Group's COO, and an incident filed 18 months ago involving racial bias in hiring. She clicked Flag for Audit. Meanwhile, at the Gala, whispers were growing. "Did you hear Bryston pulled out of Foster Tech?" "Yeah, I heard it was because of some ethics incident. No one knows what happened, but apparently it's on the record now." Liam stood frozen near the bar, jaw clenched. People were watching, smiling politely. Watching. It was the same feeling Celeste had experienced for years, being looked at, judged, dismissed. Except now, the roles had reversed. Foster stormed out the back entrance and grabbed his phone again. "Get me the head of compliance at EthosIndex. I want a name. I want to know who the hell flagged me." The voice on the other end paused. "Sir, I think the report says it came from high clearance, executive override level, possibly board level." He stiffened. "Board level? Who the hell sits that high up?" Silence. Then, "There's only one name on that tier, Dr. Celeste Monroe." He nearly dropped the phone. The woman he told to serve him salmon owned the system that just collapsed his empire. Back at the bistro, Celeste paid the bill in cash. No card trail, no record. She tipped 100% and left a handwritten thank you on the receipt. For always seeing people clearly, CM. She walked home in the cool night air. No drivers, no press. just her heels clicking on the sidewalk. Calm, certain, measured. The city didn't know what had just happened, but tomorrow morning, the headlines would start unraveling. Venture fund crashes after ethics downgrade. Foster techs fall sparks ESG panic. EthosIndex triggers 1.2B freeze. Who's behind the code? She wouldn't speak to the media. She never did. Her silence was not absence, it was strategy. By sunrise, 2 more firms had initiated internal reviews. One CEO privately messaged her assistant, "Whatever we did, we're sorry. Please don't audit us." Celeste didn't reply. She just walked into her office, removed her coat, and sat at her desk. On the wall hung a framed quote from her mother. "When they don't see you, make sure they feel you." By 7:42 a.m., the headlines hadn't dropped yet, but the emails had. "Hi Celeste, wondering if you had time to chat this week. We're reviewing our DEI policies and would love your insights. Heard about the Foster situation? If you're free, we'd be honored to reconnect." Honored. That was new. Same people who once skipped her panel at the annual ESG forum, now desperate for a Zoom link. She didn't respond. She was busy. Celeste Monroe was already 10 floors above the city, standing in front of a large glass wall that overlooked the skyline. The early sun hit the towers like gold dust, but her mind wasn't on the view. It was on the system shaking beneath it. On her desk, the live cascade monitor, still glowing red from the Foster Tech flag the night before. But now, something new. Secondary risk propagation detected. Affected entities, Greyfall Capital, fund manager for 17 ESG-linked startups. Elevate Solutions, government sustainability vendor. Kendrick and Rowe, national DEI consultancy. Each one had at least one link to Foster Tech's board, and all 3 had past incident reports, buried but not forgotten, in Celeste's quiet grid. She clicked open a tag from Kendrick and Rowe. 2017, Black woman dismissed from leadership pipeline after completing 94% of project. Credit given to junior white male peer. Filed by Anonymous. Verified. Yes. Action taken. None. Celeste stared at the line. Action taken. None. Then changed it to action in progress. Meanwhile, downtown, a closed-door meeting was unfolding at the headquarters of Bryston Capital. 3 men, 2 women, 1 legal counsel, all staring at a projector screen where Foster Tech's compliance score had dropped to 28.7, effectively radioactive in ESG circles. "This isn't just about Foster," the compliance director said. "This is about exposure. Who else have we backed that Celeste Monroe might be tracking?" Everyone went quiet, because that was the fear now. It wasn't the scandal. It was the silence before it. By 9:15 a.m., 5 VC firms had called their internal ethics teams. 2 investment newsletters published leaks about a coming purge in ESG compliance. 1 hedge fund pulled out of Greyfall Capital preemptively, citing alignment concerns. And somewhere in Midtown, a federal compliance officer with the Department of Transportation sent a short flagged message to his supervisor. "Has anyone briefed the FAA on the EthosIndex changes? We have several airport contractors on the grid." Celeste didn't move from the window, but her system did. The EthosIndex wasn't just flagging now. It was auto-alerting every firm using its compliance API, meaning ESG funds couldn't issue payouts to flagged orgs. Government vendors would be forced into temporary freeze. Federal contracts, if linked to downgraded partners, would require full audit. In under 14 hours, the dominoes had reached Washington. But inside her own team, there were cracks. Her CTO, Andre, knocked gently on the glass office door. "You have a sec?" She nodded. He stepped in, tablet in hand, eyes tight. "We've got pushback." From 2 board members, concerned that the Foster flag might have been personal. Celeste raised an eyebrow. Andre continued. "They're afraid the system's being weaponized, that you had history with Liam." She let that hang for a beat, then walked calmly to her desk. typed a line of code into the admin panel, and brought up Flag Report, Foster Tech Ventures, Behavior Code 4.6, Public Undermining of Identity, Evidence Logged, Time-stamped witness footage, audio, and prior internal flags, Clearance Level, Executive Override, Review Status, Confirmed. She turned the screen toward him. He stared. Jesus, Andre whispered. You had audio? She nodded. System caught it all. He called me help on record. Andre exhaled. Well, that shuts it down then. No, Celeste said quietly. That opens it up. At 10:07 a.m., the media finally caught up. Telltales reports, billion-dollar collapse tied to ethics flag. WSJ. Who is Celeste Monroe? The quiet force behind 1.2B ESG freeze. Forbes. The woman Silicon Valley should have respected. But by then, the damage was already beyond narrative. Kendrick and Rowe's COO resigned. Grayfall requested a pause on all client engagements. Elevate Solutions lost its federal badge. All within 18 hours of a single act of arrogance. Across the country, in a sleek glass office in San Francisco, a young black woman named Rhea Dorsey watched the news and started crying. 2 years ago, she'd been quietly fired after reporting discrimination to HR. The company? Grayfall Capital. No one believed her. No one cared. But now the woman who built the very system that firms had to answer to had just proven you don't have to shout, you just have to be heard by the right algorithm. Back in New York, Celeste closed the dashboard. She'd done enough for now, but her next move was already in motion. She pulled a slim envelope from her desk drawer, no logo, no label, and placed it at the center of her desk. Written on it, Respect and Access Mandate, Draft 0.1. It was the beginning of a new framework, a code of conduct that would require all ESG firms to sign an agreement protecting marginalized professionals or risk losing ethics certification entirely. Not just rules, reform, not just audits, accountability. She didn't need applause, didn't want credit. She just wanted to build a world where no woman would ever again be told, get the food. And if the industry needed to burn first, so be it. The Fairmont's ballroom was quiet now. Gone were the champagne toasts, the faux laughs, the glittering eyes pretending not to judge. Only the cleanup crew remained, folding chairs, sweeping crumbs, wiping away the remnants of a night that would echo through boardrooms for months. But the damage wasn't confined to spilled wine or awkward headlines. It was institutional, systemic, measured, and most of all, intentional. 8:10 a.m. Boardroom, Grayfall Capital, Midtown Manhattan. Sasha Klein, senior partner and one of the only women on the leadership team, stood behind the long glass table, arms crossed. She had just finished reading the EthosIndex report. It wasn't just a downgrade. It was a public humiliation. And worse, it was earned. I told you, she said, voice steady. You don't get to talk to women like that in public anymore. Not if they're the ones who certify your morality. Her colleague, Gerard, tried to push back. It wasn't us, Sasha, it was Foster. Foster was the catalyst, she replied. But we backed him. We gave him capital. We signed off on every one of his deals. Gerard opened his mouth, then closed it, because she was right, and the fallout was already here. Meanwhile, in a private elevator, Celeste Monroe descended from the 23rd floor. She wasn't going to a press conference. She didn't do those. She wasn't headed to a courtroom. She didn't need to sue. She was headed to a meeting with the FAA ethics liaison, tucked quietly into a nondescript federal building in Tribeca. There were no cameras, no journalists, just two people, two laptops, and a folder that could reset the airline compliance system. Inside the room, Deputy Director Elias Dorn looked exhausted. Coffee untouched, jacket wrinkled. He glanced up as Celeste entered and closed the door behind her. Dr. Monroe, he said, standing. She didn't waste time. You've read the Foster Tech Cascade, she said flatly. He nodded. And you know the exposure to DOT-linked contracts. Another nod. Celeste opened her folder and slid across a document labeled Respect and Access Mandate, Draft V0.2. Proposed Implementation Q3, Federal ESG and DEI Certification Reform. She said nothing while he skimmed, just watched. After 2 pages, he leaned back. This is going to make enemies. She didn't blink. I don't need their friendship. I need their compliance. Back at Foster Tech, Liam Foster was nowhere to be seen. He'd fled to a private estate upstate, hoping the story would die down in a week or 2. It didn't. What made it worse was the Telltales expose that dropped at noon. Exclusive. What really happened at the Gala. How one sentence took down a billion-dollar man. The video clip was short, grainy, captured from a table a few rows back. But it was clear. Hey, you. Food's running late. Maybe be useful and do something? You could hear his voice. You could see Celeste turn, slowly, and you could hear the table go silent. It spread like wildfire. In comment sections, on Twitter, across LinkedIn. Respect is not optional. You don't own the room. Celeste did not. Deserve that by 3 p.m. 6 of Foster Tech's partner funds had fully divested. One of them, Bristol, issued a rare public statement. We failed to recognize that our silence enabled a culture of dismissal. We now stand with those working to dismantle it. It was more than PR. It was fear wrapped in apology, and they were right to be afraid. 5:45 p.m., Tarmac, Washington, D.C. A private jet touched down. On board, Celeste Monroe and a single assistant. They were met by a black sedan, no fanfare. Their next meeting wasn't public either. It was with a joint ethics task force made up of the SEC, Department of Transportation, and the Office of Federal Contracting. Celeste opened her laptop. The Respect and Access Mandate was live. Real-time feedback, early comments already trickling in. More than 27 industry leaders had reviewed it in the last 3 hours. Not one had objected to its core requirement. No firm shall receive federal ESG or DEI-linked benefits without a certified ethics score, measured not by internal audits, but by third-party, behavior-based evaluation systems. It was dry language, but it meant this. If you treat someone like a servant at a gala, your company will be treated like a liability in federal records. That night, back in New York, the same ballroom where Celeste had been humiliated held another private dinner. This time, the crowd was smaller. Half the faces from last night didn't show, and the ones who did, they whispered. They checked their phones. They lowered their voices when anyone walked by wearing navy or black, because now anyone could be Celeste, and everyone might be watching, somewhere in Harlem. Viola Monroe, 78, sat in her favorite chair, watching the evening news. She saw her daughter's face flash across the screen. No title, no soundbite, just a quiet image of a woman holding a folder as she walked into a federal building. Viola smiled. She remembered when Celeste used to cry after interviews, wondering if her name was too ethnic to ever be taken seriously. Now, her name was a protocol. Back at her apartment, Celeste kicked off her heels. She didn't check social media. She didn't read headlines. She made tea, fed her cat, and opened her notes for V0.3 of the mandate. She wasn't done. Because the gala wasn't the peak. It was just the proof. Proof that power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes, it simply outlasts the noise. She flagged Foster in under 8 minutes. What do you think she could do in 8 days? Anonymous board member caught whispering at a private VC dinner. The mood inside boardrooms across New York, Chicago, and San Francisco had shifted. Not tense, not anxious, terrified. Because for the first time, it wasn't a scandal they could out-PR. It was a system they couldn't predict. And it had a name, Celeste Monroe. 9:00 a.m. Bayview Partners, VC firm, San Francisco, CEO. Craig Lanners paced in front of a glass whiteboard. He was mid-rant, sleeves rolled up, tie hanging loose, voice cracking. This can't be just her. No single woman could have built this overnight. His VP of Risk, a soft-spoken woman named Marcia, adjusted her glasses and said plainly, "She didn't build it overnight. She's been building it for 10 years. We just didn't look." Craig blinked. 10 years? Marcia nodded. She architected EthosIndex. She helped write the early compliance clauses for ESG reform in 2015. We all thought she was just a consultant. Turns out, she was the firewall. The room went silent. Craig muttered, "We called her the quiet lady from DC. I remember someone once joked she looked like a glorified admin." He stopped, because now, that admin had cost his firm $70 million in investor pullouts overnight. 10:30 a.m., Whitlock Strategic, a global PR firm. Their CEO, Evan Bryce, was used to cleaning up celebrity messes, product disasters, CEO scandals. He'd seen it all. But this wasn't about spin. It was about compliance, and worse, ethics scored in public. He stood in front of his media war team. "Here's the problem," Evan said, pointing to the live ticker. "The EthosIndex isn't private. Anyone with an investor login can see the downgrade logs, the flags, the evidence, and those logs are linked to time-stamped behavior, not just summaries." His strategist, Ryan, chimed in. "You mean, if one of our clients mistreats someone at a gala and gets flagged?" "It's over," Evan finished. "No amount of PR can scrub it. No NDA can bury it. Because Celeste didn't just freeze Foster. She created a new playbook where proof lives longer than power." 1 p.m. Silicon Valley Investors Circle. Private gathering over lunch. Dozens of CEOs passed around a printed copy of the Respect and Access Mandate, Draft V03. A few were fuming. "This is insane," one said. "She wants us to sign a behavior contract for federal eligibility?" Another snapped back. "You mean she wants us to treat people with basic respect?" "Yeah, the horror." Laughter, dry and nervous. But the tone changed when someone read Section 12 aloud. "Companies with consistent low ratings from marginalized professionals, verified via third-party pattern detection, will be barred from ethics-certified funds and excluded from federal ESG infrastructure opportunities." Translation: they weren't just being watched. They were being ranked. And for once, none of them controlled the scoreboard. 2:45 p.m. Viola Monroe's living room, Georgetown. Celeste sat beside her mother, sipping tea. Viola clicked the remote, pausing a TV segment showing a roundtable of 4 white male CEOs trying to explain how they fully support diversity. Viola chuckled. "They scared now, baby." Celeste smirked. "Scared of a black woman with a spreadsheet. Who would have thought?" Her mother leaned forward, serious now. "They never saw you coming because you weren't loud. You weren't flashy. You let them believe they were safe." Celeste nodded. "And now?" Viola smiled. "Now they finally see the danger of mistaking silence for weakness." 4:30 p.m. FAA Compliance Committee, teleconference. 12 members on screen, all federal, all shaken. The chairwoman, Angela Ruiz, cleared her throat. "Colleagues, we have 3 proposals on the table, but only one includes integration with the EthosIndex." A pause. "Any objections?" No hands raised. She added, "Then effective immediately, federal ESG-linked programs will require adherence to the Respect and Access Mandate as precondition for renewal." And just like that, Celeste's quiet retaliation became federal policy. 7 p.m. Whitlock, Strategic. Again, CEO Evan Bryce updated his crisis template. "For all clients, new protocol. Proactively request EthosIndex audit. Send staff through behavioral training. Acknowledge public mistakes early. Don't spin." Celeste doesn't respond to pressure. She responds to patterns. He paused, then added one last line. "Assume the quietest person in the room is the one who built the room." 9:30 p.m. Celeste's home, DC. The city lights flickered through her floor-to-ceiling windows. Celeste sat alone, typing. She wasn't writing a press release. She was building EthosIndex 2.0. The next version would allow marginalized employees across industries to flag patterns anonymously, not just single incidents. With enough corroboration, a score would drop. Publicly, automatically, without Celeste lifting a finger. Justice at scale. No more hoping someone in power would believe them. Now the system would. And as she saved her draft and closed the laptop, she whispered to herself, "Let them sleep uneasy tonight. That's what happens when your boardroom forgets humanity." 6:00 p.m. Studio B, CNN headquarters, New York City. The cameras were already rolling. The air in the studio felt different, heavier, as if everyone, including the lighting crew, sensed that tonight wasn't just another interview. It was history being recorded. The set was sleek, modern. 2 chairs, 1 glass table, no panel, no distractions. Sitting opposite the host, Celeste Monroe wore a simple navy suit. No makeup crew had touched her up. No stylist had laid out her outfit. She looked exactly the same as she did in the viral video. Calm, direct, and impossible to intimidate. The anchor, Malcolm Vance, cleared his throat and smiled, but even he looked slightly unsure. "Dr. Monroe, thank you for joining us tonight." She nodded. "Thank you for the invitation." No over-the-top pleasantries, no media-trained banter. Malcolm glanced down at his notes, then dove right in. "You've triggered what some are calling the most rapid ethical compliance shift in investment history. Did you plan this outcome from the beginning?" Celeste's voice was steady. "No, I didn't plan for Liam Foster to humiliate me at a gala, but I planned for the day someone would, and built a system that wouldn't need me to speak, just to signal." The camera cut to Malcolm, who blinked. That system, the EthosIndex, has now led to 19 firms losing ESG eligibility. One CEO stepped down yesterday. Were you prepared for that scale of fallout? Celeste didn't flinch. "I was prepared for accountability. If the outcome is collapse, then that speaks to how fragile their values were to begin with." Silence filled the studio. No music, no graphics, just her words. And across living rooms in Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, and beyond, people leaned in. 6:14 p.m., comment sections on fire. The live chat exploded. Elderly black viewers, middle-aged professionals, students, even retired federal workers were all saying the same thing. She didn't have to yell. She just showed up with the receipts. That woman built a whole firewall while they laughed at her. Telltales moment. This is karma with code. Back in the studio, Malcolm's tone softened. "Dr. Monroe, you haven't made any public statements before this. In fact, for someone who just reshaped the federal ESG landscape, you've remained remarkably silent. Why now?" She leaned forward slightly. "Because silence isn't absence, it's observation. And now that they've seen the system in motion, it's time they hear the reasoning behind it." Malcolm paused, then asked what many had been waiting for. "What was going through your mind when Liam Foster told you to go serve food?" Celeste looked directly into the camera for the first time. "I remembered the way my grandmother used to say, 'Don't let them borrow your rage, baby. Invest it instead.' So I didn't rage. I invested." 6:22 p.m. White House, private viewing room. Inside a quiet chamber, President Ellen Reyes watched the interview, her advisors beside her. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Celeste wasn't just explaining her actions, she was redefining professional dignity in front of a nation. President Reyes leaned over and whispered to her chief of staff, "We're going to need her at the next ethics summit. Not as a guest, as a lead author." 6:29 p.m. Interview nears its end. Malcolm glanced at the clock, surprised how fast time had gone. He skipped half his questions and didn't care. "Dr. Monroe," he said carefully, "what do you say to the critics who claim this is performative? That you're making Wall Street too emotionally sensitive?" Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Empathy isn't sensitivity, it's infrastructure. And if your company collapses because it couldn't pass a basic decency threshold, it didn't deserve to stand in the first place." A pause. Then, for the first time, Malcolm smiled like a man who had just witnessed something historic. I think that might be the quote of the year. 6:31 p.m. Interview ends. They shook hands. Cameras cut. Producers clapped quietly. Celeste stood, nodded politely to everyone, and walked out without checking her phone. She didn't need to. 6:45 p.m. Social media explosion. Am I invest your rage? Celeste, Monroe. Respect is infrastructure. @ethics is power. Clips flooded TikTok. LinkedIn turned into a think piece battlefield. Twitter was on fire. One of the top liked tweets read, "She didn't burn bridges, she rerouted the highway." Another read, "The moment she said, 'Silence isn't absence,' I felt every inch of my mother's resilience in her." 7:30 p.m. Viola Monroe's living room. Viola dabbed her eyes with a napkin and whispered, "She did it her way." She didn't mean her daughter just gave a great interview. She meant Celeste had made the world play by her rules. Quiet, focused, decisive, and undeniable. 8:12 p.m. FAA policy update goes live. While the world was still watching the clip, a federal bulletin was sent to all major ESG-linked institutions. The Respect and Access Mandate. Effective immediately, all ESG-eligible applicants must provide third-party ethics ratings. Systems linked to the EthosIndex 2.0 are recommended. Firms with persistent behavior-linked flagging will lose federal access. No press release, no debate, just action, the Celeste way. Later that night, Celeste's apartment. She didn't watch the reruns. She didn't check her trending tab. She just took off her shoes, poured tea, and wrote her next set of protocols. Because interviews inspire, but infrastructure endures. And Celeste Monroe wasn't finished yet. The trading floor was dark. Not quiet, just dark. No one showed up. Overnight, 9 of Foster's largest institutional investors pulled out, citing unresolved ethical risk after being flagged by EthosIndex 2.0. By 6 a.m., the firm's capital reserves had dropped below the regulatory minimum. Just like that, they were marked non-compliant. Not by protesters, not by the press, by code. No meetings, no warning. Just collapse. Across Harlem, Celia Gardner stood in her small kitchen staring at the headline on TV. Breaking: Foster Equity collapses after ethics downgrade. CEO resigns. Her boyfriend leaned over her shoulder. "That's the guy from the Gala, right? The one who tried to humiliate your old boss?" Celia nodded, barely blinking. And she didn't raise her voice, didn't retaliate. She just turned the system on. At EthosIndex headquarters, Celeste sat in a simple glass office. Same tea, same quiet. The 2.0 dashboard flashed, 41 pattern flags. 7 companies. 4 of them whistleblower verified. Her deputy, Rena, stepped in. "You just triggered a 3rd-level compliance cascade." Celeste didn't look up. "Which firm?" "Concord Mutual. They've been suppressing promotions for women of color, 4 years across 3 states. Push it public." "You sure? That'll shut down their federal contracts." Celeste finally looked up. "We're not punishing them, Rena. We're protecting everyone they thought wouldn't speak." What followed were the calls. Linda Vaughn, a retired aerospace engineer, picked up her landline after letting it ring twice. "Ms. Vaughn, this is the Department of Transportation. We're following up on an ethics flag tied to your 2018 exit. You may be eligible for a federal settlement." She sat down slowly, whispering, "No one's ever called me back before." Andre Lewis, a janitor who had once cleaned for a real estate firm, stared at his screen as a message popped up from a private ethics investigator. "Mr. Lewis, your story matches a multi-flagged behavior pattern. May we schedule a review?" His hands shook so hard he dropped his mug. And Devika Sharma, still sitting in the Foster building, opened her inbox to find a message from a senior reporter at The Intercept. "Would you be willing to speak on record? Or off? We've reviewed internal behavior reports and your name comes up again and again, not for complaints, but for warnings ignored." She didn't respond. She packed her bag and left that day. At a press podium, Liam Foster faced the cameras with barely concealed panic. We had no indication that internal culture issues were this widespread. A sharp voice from the press pit shot back. You cut HR investigation budgets and reassigned your ethics officer to marketing. Was that your version of no indication? Liam's mouth opened, then closed. Celeste wasn't in the room, but her fingerprints were on every inch of it. At the White House, President Reyes issued a quiet but firm directive. All federal programs tied to ESG or DEI must adopt third-party pattern detection by Q3. EthosIndex is now a recommended platform. Firms that don't comply will lose access. There was no debate. Meanwhile, inside a conference room at an airline conglomerate, 5 execs sat pale-faced. One slammed a file down. Turns out the AI seat assignment system downgraded names flagged as ethnic. We've got 200 complaints, flagged by Ethos. Another sighed. So, what do we do now? A younger voice at the table murmured, We call Celeste Monroe, or we wait until we're next. That same afternoon, Celia's phone buzzed. Incoming, CEL, Monroe. She answered, breath caught in her throat. Hi, Celia. You ready to build version 3? Celia blinked. You mean on the core development team? I mean at the center, Celeste said. We don't need people who shout. We need people who are never allowed to finish their sentence. At sunset, a final call rang through. Unknown number. Celeste answered. It was Liam. His voice was a mess, cracked and bitter. You didn't have to do this. You could have just made a statement. Celeste was quiet. Then, I didn't bring your firm down, Liam. Your choices did. I just stopped cleaning up after them. She paused, then said it with the weight of 10,000 unheard voices. And the next time you see a quiet black woman in the room, don't mistake her silence for permission. She hung up. No fanfare, no victory dance. She turned back to her window and watched the skyline. The city pulsed with lights, as it always did. But something had shifted. Not a fire, not a fight. Just a silent infrastructure running underneath it all, finally activated. And Celeste Monroe? She wasn't building a movement. She was building a standard. Celeste Monroe wasn't planning to attend the Federal Equity Summit. She hated summits. Too much applause, too many lanyards, and not enough real action. But when her assistant handed her a list of attending organizations and the final panel topic, she tilted her head and read again. Private capital, public ethics, how ESG will be scored in 2026. Foster Equity had withdrawn. Concord Mutual had gone silent. 3 other firms had changed panelists last minute. And yet, the summit's main stage was still packed with CEOs ready to speak on values and accountability. She sighed and closed her tablet. Book me a seat, she said. Second row, not the front. The ballroom was even more extravagant than the gala weeks ago. Crystal chandeliers, velvet ropes, smoked salmon hors d'oeuvres plated like museum pieces. But the air felt tight. Everyone was waiting for something. Celeste didn't wear a power suit or anything that screamed important. She showed up in a plain navy dress, minimal makeup, and a quiet presence that turned heads even as it asked for no attention. People moved out of her way without realizing why. When she passed the registration desk, the woman behind it smiled. Welcome, Dr. Monroe. You've been pre-cleared. Your seat is ready. She nodded. Thank you. No fuss, no drama, just gravity. 2 rows in front of her sat Cameron Blythe, the interim CEO of Brighton Capital. A week ago, they'd narrowly avoided being flagged by EthosIndex. Thanks to a quiet overnight review Celeste's team allowed after a sincere apology and an immediate ethics overhaul. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Then he stood up and walked back to her row, holding out a card. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, voice low. Your team was firm but fair. We've fired 4 execs, and we've rehired 2 women who never should have been pushed out. Celeste looked him in the eye. Don't thank me. Keep your systems honest." He nodded and returned to his seat. The panel began. 3 white male CEOs, 1 Latina founder from a tech accelerator, and, to the surprise of everyone, an empty chair with a nameplate that read, "Dr. Celeste Monroe, EthosIndex." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She's not on the schedule, right?" Another added, "That seat's symbolic. She's not here." But then, the moderator smiled. "Well, it looks like the chair won't stay empty after all. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Monroe has arrived." Celeste stood up slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She walked to the stage, nodded once to the moderator, and sat down. The room was silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. The first question went to the tech founder. "What's the biggest challenge you see with ethics enforcement in ESG?" She gave a polished answer about measurement tools, diverse hiring, and funding gaps. The next went to a CEO. His answer danced around brand safety and AI-based inclusion strategies. Finally, the moderator turned to Celeste. "Dr. Monroe, what's your take on how enforcement should evolve?" She leaned forward. "I think enforcement should become obsolete." The moderator blinked. "I'm sorry," she continued. "If we do this right, we won't need watchdogs. We'll have systems that don't tolerate what humans too often excuse." There was no applause, just attention. Real attention. Then came the final prompt. "If you could set the standard for all ESG accountability going forward, what would you write into law?" Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. "I already wrote it." The moderator blinked. "I'm sorry?" Celeste opened the folder and laid it flat on the table. Inside was a 1-page document. Clean, simple. It read, "The Respect and Access Mandate. Section 1. Every firm receiving ESG-labeled funding must adopt an auditable ethics system that protects employees from bias, retaliation, and institutional erasure. Section 2. Ethics scores must be made public quarterly. Section 3. Repeated pattern violations will trigger mandatory federal review. Section 4. All leadership boards must include at least 1 ethics officer with autonomous power, not reporting to HR or marketing. Section 5. Firms flagged non-compliant for 2 quarters lose federal contract eligibility." The room froze. This wasn't a pitch. It was a declaration. The moderator spoke carefully. "Dr. Monroe, is this a recommendation?" "No," she said. "It's a precondition." "For what?" Celeste finally smiled. Not wide, just enough. For staying in business past next year. Backstage, CEOs lined up to speak with her. Some offered handshakes, others begged for a meeting. She didn't take any of their cards. Instead, she turned to a young woman working the lighting booth, a black girl with natural curls and a quiet clipboard. "You," Celeste said softly, "you interested in systems work?" The girl's eyes widened. "Me? Yes. I need someone who watches from the back of the room. That's where the truth lives." The girl nodded slowly, then faster. Celeste handed her a number. By that evening, the mandate had gone viral. Hashtags flooded the feed. Respect and access. Celeste was right, not silent anymore. And one unexpected trend. The woman they tried to make a waitress, paired with side-by-side photos. One from the Gala, one from the summit stage. No one tagged foster equity. They didn't need to. The next day, Congress issued a statement of bipartisan support. Within 48 hours, 3 senators signed a proposal to embed the mandate into ESG eligibility criteria. And within a week, the National Board of Ethics and Finance voted unanimously to adopt the full text into their evaluation standards. One comment from the board chair made its way into every article. What Celeste Monroe did wasn't revenge. It was a repair. Back in her apartment, Celeste sat by the window, watching the skyline as she had so many nights before. But this time, something was different. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother's old friend, Sister Patrice. the one who used to lead women's Bible study in Mississippi. The message was just one sentence. "Baby girl, we see you." She didn't cry, but she did close her eyes, and for the first time in months, she let herself exhale. Not in defense, not in calculation, but in peace. The morning after the Respect and Access mandate went public, Celeste Monroe walked through the quiet halls of her office, tea in one hand, a red folder in the other. The air felt lighter, but the work had only just begun. Outside, the press still swarmed the lobby. Headlines spun. Ethics revolution led by woman once mistaken for staff. 1.2B frozen, 19 partners pulled. Monroe changes the game. But inside, the office stayed the same. No marble walls, no ego, just data, silence, and intention. Rena, her deputy, was already in the war room when Celeste walked in. "They've started pulling out," Rena said without looking up. 3 VC firms, 2 ESG platforms delisted overnight, and one executive from Concord just emailed his resignation letter, CC'd the whole board. Celeste set the tea down. "Good. Any updates on the whistleblower protection clause?" "We finalized it. Every ethics partner under EthosIndex 2.0 must offer legal and financial protection to whistleblowers within 72 hours of flagging." Celeste smiled faintly. "Put it in motion. Today." The system didn't just freeze money. It rewired how people saw power. Not the loudest voice, not the richest man, the most accountable one. By noon, 3 airlines had paused hiring. 8 public universities called to inquire about integrating EthosIndex for admission staff. And an unexpected call came from the Department of Commerce. They weren't asking for a proposal. They wanted a meeting. Celeste scheduled it for Thursday. She didn't reschedule her lunch with the janitorial staff. Later that day, in a marble-walled office far uptown, Jeremy Lang, CEO of an old money investment firm, threw his phone against the glass. "She tanked us without ever walking into the building." His assistant stood awkwardly nearby. "Sir, she actually was in the building, twice. We flagged her name wrong in security." Jeremy froze, then laughed. Not out of humor, out of panic. "Pull every file. I want a report by tomorrow." But it was too late. Celeste's system had already lowered their public trust score to ethically at risk. Their ESG investors began calling that evening. Back at Ethos, a dozen young analysts gathered for their afternoon review. One of them, a Gen Z coder named Malik, nudged Celia. "Hey," he whispered. "You see this?" He tilted his screen. A viral post had racked up 2.7 million views in 4 hours. It showed a side-by-side comparison. 1. Celeste at the Gala, being handed a tray like she worked there. 2. Celeste at the summit, flanked by federal leaders, unveiling the mandate. Caption: "She wasn't a waitress, she was the system." Celia grinned. "They're starting to get it." Malik added, "You think she reads the comments?" Celia shook her head. "She reads patterns, not praise." That evening, Celeste stepped into a quiet coffee shop near her apartment, a spot she'd frequented before anyone knew her name. The barista, an older Filipino man named Leo, recognized her instantly. "I knew it," he smiled. "My daughter sent me your photo. I told her, that's my 7 a.m. chamomile tea customer." Celeste smiled. "Still the same order?" As she waited, a young black woman walked in and froze when she saw Celeste. Then, slowly, she approached. I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, holding a laptop. "I'm writing my thesis on ethics tech, and I just wanted to say thank you for showing us what's possible." Celeste nodded gently. "Don't thank me. Build better." Meanwhile, far from New York, in corporate boardrooms across the country, new conversations were unfolding. In one ESG firm, a 50-something white executive tapped his pen nervously. "Do we fight her?" "No," another exec said, quieter. "We adapt. Even if it costs us $400 million, a younger analyst interjected. If we don't adopt her standards, we'll lose $1 billion in credibility." The room fell silent. The respect and access mandate wasn't policy yet, but it was reality. One fund restructured its entire board. Another hired 2 former whistleblowers as internal ethics advisors. Several media outlets requested interviews. Celeste declined them all. She didn't need airtime. She needed outcomes. At home, she read the new reports. 2 black women rehired with back pay. 1 autistic analyst given leadership training. A formerly silenced transgender employee promoted after a pattern review revealed bias. Celeste closed the file. This was the work, not the headline, the shift. Late that night, Celeste received a message from someone she hadn't heard from in 11 years. Jason K., the man who once took credit for her algorithm, the one who got promoted off her work. The message was short. "You were right. I wasn't. I'm sorry." She didn't reply. Forgiveness didn't always need a response, just distance. Across the country, people shared their own stories online. One woman wrote, "I got told I didn't look like a VP. I didn't yell. I documented. Now I'm head of operations, and my company is Ethos compliant." A man posted, "I spent 3 years being told I was too direct. Now I train directors on pattern bias. Quiet isn't weakness, it's strategy." Celeste saw none of them directly, but she felt the shift. By the week's end, a prominent investment platform publicly committed to the full mandate. 19 more followed. ESG funding moved, not just with dollars, but with intention. One senator even said on live TV, it took one woman's silence to expose an entire industry's noise. The final scene of that week wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Celeste stood at a window in the Ethos office, sipping tea, eyes on the horizon. Behind her, a new hire nervously approached. "Dr. Monroe?" "Yes?" "We have the draft ready for the international expansion." Celeste turned. "Let's read it." As they walked to the review table, the younger staffer said quietly, "I used to think being overlooked was a flaw." Celeste paused. "It's not," she said. "It's training. Because when you stop needing to be seen, you start seeing everything." And with that, she picked up the pen, ready for what came next. 2 months later, the ballroom looked the same. Same velvet chairs, same gold-trimmed drapes, same orchestra playing smooth jazz no one really listened to. But something was different. This time, they knew who Celeste Monroe was. They didn't mistake her for staff. They didn't hand her a tray. They handed her the mic. She didn't take the stage in a loud red dress or drape herself in diamonds. She wore navy again, just like the first time. Intentional. The woman who once sat quietly in the back now stood front and center. Not because she demanded it, but because the room had no choice but to face her. A voice cut through the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman behind the most significant ethics reform in private capital history, Dr. Celeste Monroe." Polite applause started, then grew. Not performative. Respectful. Earned. Celeste stepped forward slowly. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't smile for the cameras. She looked at the young interns seated in the far back corner, the ones who used to be invisible. That's who she spoke to. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she began. "I wasn't invited to speak at that first gala. I wasn't on the list, but I showed up anyway, and they tried to hand me food." The room shifted. No one moved. "No one in this room handed me power. You just handed me disrespect, and I turned it into design." She paused, then lifted a small booklet, clean, printed, bound in deep blue. "This is the final version of the Respect and Access Mandate. It's been adopted by 147 investment firms, 21 banks, and 12 universities." A few gasps, a few heads down, a few deep nods. Celeste kept going. "And now it's being introduced as a federal standard. But don't clap. This isn't a win, it's a correction." She closed the booklet. For everyone in the room who used to be handed trays, who was told to wait outside, to smile softer, to not speak so directly. We are not angry, we are architects. After her speech, she didn't linger for selfies or interviews. She walked out through the side exit, same way she entered the first night. Quiet, clear, done. The next morning, across dozens of cities, hundreds of companies downloaded the new EthosIndex protocol. Boardrooms got quieter, bias got exposed, budgets shifted from branding to rebuilding. In a classroom in Detroit, a professor changed her syllabus to include Celeste's story under Modern Systems Reform. In a podcast in LA, 3 Black entrepreneurs named their new tech startup Monroe. And at a dinner table in Houston, a mother told her 12-year-old daughter, "You see her? That's how you move in silence and still shake the whole room." As for Celeste, she returned to DC. She took a week off. She walked the Potomac trails. She read paperbacks from thrift stores. She answered no emails. And one morning, she sat by her kitchen window, watching sunlight pour through the steam of her tea. On the table was a note, handwritten, no signature, just 5 words. "Thank you for staying seated." Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not stand, but stay seated, stay watching, stay building. And when the time is right, flip the whole damn system quietly. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to wait your turn, tell us in the comments. What would you build if no one stood in your way? And tell us where you're watching from. Your story matters more than you know.